Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Sam Shaw, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I am back today with another client interview for you guys. And today I'm excited to be on with Bryant, who finished his recruiting process for his junior summer internship a few months ago, but we just haven't had a chance to catch up until now. And so I'm excited to get him on here. And Bryant, thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, to start out, if you don't mind just kind of giving people a little bit of a background on yourself, like just tell people who you are, introduce yourself real quick, and then we can dive into kind of how recruiting went for you.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Bryant Jung. I'm currently a junior at the University of Chicago studying economics and also recently decided to do a double major in political science. So there's that. Originally born and raised in Korea, spent time there until middle school. Uh, and fortunately, my parents decided to send me to the U.S. when I was in middle school. So, been in the U.S. since then, in boarding school, and yeah, came to the University of Chicago and got really interested in finance pretty early on, I guess, around the end of high school, actually, and really got started with recruiting around like second year, and eventually got here. So, that's just a little quick background on myself, I guess.
Got it. Okay, cool. So you're an international student then from Korea, basically. Like,
Yeah, that is correct. So, I don't have a green card. I'm not a U.S. citizen. I have an F1 visa.
got it. Okay. That probably, I'm sure we'll dive into this, but that probably made things a lot tougher from a recruiting standpoint, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there.
Okay. I've also spoken to other Korean students before where, especially the guys, like, I mean, because you guys have to serve in the military and stuff, right? Like, I know some guys, they do that in college. So, how does that kind of play into everything?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it up because after, for me at least, after my first year, I decided to, go to the military. It's pretty typical to go after your first year because, if you go right after high school, you're kind of like you never really experienced college. You kind of want to just get a taste for it before you go. That's what everyone else does. And so me and a bunch of friends all went to the military at the same time from our school. And I was actually very lucky because I was selected to serve in Lebanon as a UN peacekeeper representing, the South Korean contingent there.
Hmm.
And that was a, very interesting experience. I can talk more about that, I guess. But yeah, that's how I went to the military, spent 20 months there and came back and joined back as a sophomore.
Did you say 20 months?
Yeah, 20 months.
Okay, got it. So, you went there for almost 2 years after freshman year, and then you came back and then you just picked back up right where you left off and just came back as a sophomore, and then you just went into recruiting basically.
Yep, yep, that's how it went on.
Okay, got it. Interesting. Okay, cool. And so let's talk about recruiting. So, I mean, you came back from this stint in at the UN as a peacekeeper, and then you came back, and it's sophomore year. Um, and like, when did you know that you wanted to pursue banking? Was that something you always knew, or when did you kind of decide to go down this path?
Yeah, so around when I was in the military, I really decided that specific like I was interested in finance before, but it
Mhm.
was more like sort of an abstract level. I just like, I love reading about the markets. Love reading about, Warren Buffett and some of these other investors. I think the thought that I should go down the path of investment banking, that really clicked with me around the end of my military career. And I decided, hey, when I go back, I'm a sophomore, and I've been talking with all of my American friends who already had gone through recruiting, and they were like, yeah, it starts around this time.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I should try to get prepared for that. So yeah, that's where what my mind was at when I was just stepping into my sophomore year, starting to prepare for recruiting.
Got it. Okay. So then you came back, and then like sophomore year, first semester, what'd you do then? Did you just kind of hit the ground running and start like networking and start studying for the interviews, or what did you do?
Yeah, I guess I did have a preconception of what I needed to do. I was taking class-wise, I was just taking regular classes, a mix of core classes, but also we have a selection of U Chicago booth classes available. So I was taking I was taking accounting, which is definitely useful. And but also, yeah, I already knew in the back of my head that I needed to do networking, this thing called networking that you have to do in order to get this job. Um, and yeah, I was deciding to go on I decided to go on a trip to New York to meet some of these bankers. And beforehand, I tried to, cold email them and like try to talk to them. Looking back, I kind of didn't know what I was doing that well. And I think that's also around the time when I started with the Wall Street Mastermind.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I think you came to us. I'm looking at our records. It was like back in mid-December of sophomore year. So it was like probably around winter break. Like you had just finished your first semester, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So like what was the impetus for that? Like what made you want to kind of check out Wall Street Mastermind? Because obviously not everyone uses Wall Street Mastermind to help them recruit. So like what made you want to check us out?
Right. So I guess even though, even if I knew what I sort of had to do or needed to do or whatever, because like there were like I had some friends who were like fourth years at that point who were going into investment banking.
Mm,
They were kind of helping me out. I guess they were just giving me some advice here and there. But I definitely felt that there was a lack of guidance in terms of, what should I do in these specific moments? And I was kind of I felt that I was left out there on my own trying to figure it out. I had some friends who were also recruiting with me, but then, it's not like they know any significantly better than I do because we're kind of in the same position, right?
right.
So, we're just like reading through Wall Street Oasis and like, talking to people, and then you just come to a point where like, oh, I lack resources.
Mm,
And I was watching, I don't know what it was, but it was I was watching this video, and there was a YouTube ad of, Wall Street Mastermind, and you're just speaking in the camera with the Wolf of Wall Street poster in the background. And yeah, I remember it. And I thought, yeah, I should try this guy out. So I booked a call with you.
Got it. Okay. And that's how you found us. Awesome. And so you mentioned like originally you were kind of getting help from, seniors and stuff, like friends that had already gone through the process. Were these like seniors you met in the finance club at school, or like where did you find these resources?
Yeah, actually, so I was not involved at all with any finance clubs when I was in my first year, right? I
Mhm.
just had a couple of friends, and it turns out that some of the friends that I just had during that time ended up pursuing finance. Like the friends that I had when I was a first year before joining the military,
Mm,
and when I got back, these guys were, obviously they were fourth years because I was gone for 2 years,
right.
and they had already gone through that process, so they were kind of there to help me out, but obviously they weren't like super dedicated. They got classes to go to, and
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of how it turned out.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, no, I asked that because I mean, I think what you're describing is a very standard experience that a lot of people go through, right? Which is a lot of times you probably hear about banking, probably through your other friends at school, maybe upperclassmen who have gone through it, and then that's kind of the first place that you go to for help. And I think it can be helpful in the very beginning just to kind of give you like at a high level the lay of the land and hey, here are the things you need to do. Like you need a network, right? Or you need to get an internship or this and that. But then in terms of like actually getting into the specifics of how to do these things, most of the times I think what people find is that I mean their friends aren't obligated. First of all, their friends aren't obligated to help them get jobs. They're not like they're not your mentor or something. They're just your friend, right? And second of
Yeah,
all, they're not gonna. They're very busy themselves, and and quite frankly, probably they just went through their own recruiting process, and the last thing they want to do is go through it again. They're trying to put it behind them, right?
yeah.
And so you're kind of they'll give you some pointers here and there, but there's so much that goes into recruiting that a lot of times that's not really enough, right? It almost feels like kind of a black box, especially for someone.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I guess one thing that I would love to add to that is that, it's sometimes not just about, sometimes you know the questions, right? And you just don't have the answers. Like,
Mm,
what should I do at this kind of situation? What should I do at an info session, for example,
yeah,
or what should I do at a coffee chat? But sometimes you just don't know how to ask the questions in the first place because you get it. You, for example, like when I was preparing for interviews, like I had constructed my own set of answers, and I thought it was totally fine, right? I thought, hey, it's what's wrong with going on for like 3 minutes or four
mm,
minutes on tell me about yourself,
right.
and then you kind of have to have someone to step in and say, look, that's not, you know, I mean, it's not the best way to go about it. So I
Right.
think that was really helpful in terms of, if you ask the questions, then these people, like my friends, will give it to them. But
Yeah.
sometimes you don't even know what kind of questions that you should be asking.
Yeah, and you don't really want to, most people don't really want to go to their friend with every single question, right? It's like
Yeah, exactly. That too.
every time you have a question, it's like, hey, by the way, what about this? Okay, now can you look at this question? Okay, now can you look at this question? It's like at some point you're gonna have no friends because people are like trying to stay away from you because all you do is, bother them with your questions, right? Which is not what they signed
Exactly,
up
exactly.
for.
Yeah. And
I,
then if
yeah,
you don't go to friends, then you end up relying on like, online resources, like websites, public websites, stuff like that. Like as I said, Wall Street Oasis, but that's not like, it's not comprehensive in any way either.
yeah. I think, look, what I always tell people is, when you're looking for help for this kind, or not just for recruiting, but for anything in general, like if you're looking for um, mentors, and I always think, having mentors is a good idea for pretty much anything in life, right? Especially things that are important. I mean, I wrote a post recently. It is the new year now, January 2021. So I was reflecting on my 2020, and we had a great year. Wall Street Mastermind did really well. We more than doubled our business. But I was reflecting on why I was able to grow so fast in a year when we had a pandemic, and a lot of businesses suffered, and obviously a lot of the our potential clients were going through financial issues. Their parents lost their jobs and whatnot. And so you would think that it would have been a tough year. And one of the biggest things for me was like I invested over $50,000 in 2020 just on mentors, like business mentors
Oh,
and different types of mentors. And they've been through a lot of the problems that I went through in 2020. And anytime I had a problem, I could just go to them and not feel shy about bothering them or whatever. And I knew that, and I think the more important point is like, it can't just be any mentor, but if you're going to have someone help you with something as important as your business, in my case, or in your case, something as important as your career, the two things that I always tell people to look for are one, um, are they qualified to help you, right? Meaning, how much more do
mhm.
they really know compared to what you already know, right? Because if someone is just like, if it's just your friend going through the process with you, like you said, they don't really know any more than you do, right? If it's a upperclassman that's gone through the process one time, maybe they're a year above you or 2 years above you, they're a little bit ahead of you, but still pretty small sample size, or they're not that much more experienced than you are, right? So that's the first thing. You want someone who's
Exactly.
ideally as qualified as possible, because the more qualified that person is and the more experience that they have, the more incremental the improvement's going to be on your end, right? And so that's the first thing. But the second thing is, there are a lot of people that are out there that are obviously qualified to help you, right? Because probably most people that are working in banking or have worked in banking and have been interviewers on these interview panels, they can probably help you out with the recruiting process. But the second thing is like, how invested are they in your outcome, right? Like how much time are they actually going to spend helping you? Because most of the bankers, if they don't know you, and you ask them for help, they either won't bother, or they might have one conversation with you and it might be 30 minutes, and they'll give you some high level advice that they give to everybody, but it's not really customized for your personal situation because they just don't know you that well, right? And
Yeah,
so
exactly. I think you nailed it there.
yeah, so those are the two things that I look for personally when I look for a mentor, is like, how much better is this person than me at what I'm trying to accomplish? And then two, do they have skin in the game, and are they gonna are they gonna care if I get this job or not? In other words, like, they're not gonna be annoyed if I have questions all the time. I can bother them whenever I want, and also like, they actually care whether I get the job or not, because if I don't get the job, uh, it actually, is gonna negatively affect them in some way, right? Like that's the difference between something like Wall Street Mastermind, where hey, if you don't get a job, it reflects poorly on me and our on our business, right? Because then we didn't deliver for our clients. But for your friends, it's like if you don't get a job, they'll feel bad for you for about 30 seconds, and then they're gonna
Hopefully
move on
longer,
and
but
keep living their best life, right?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so that I mean that's what I was like, tell people to think about, because like, obviously, um, there are much cheaper and even free resources out there compared to Wall Street Mastermind. And people are always like, well, why should we use you? And those are pretty much the reasons, in my opinion, right? It's just like
Yeah.
the level of help that you're going to get. Speaking of that, though, let's talk about what you actually did in Wall Street Mastermind. So, like, I don't know what you kind of expected coming in. I think that would be interesting to talk about a little bit. And then what did you actually get out of it now that you're on the other side, having graduated from the program? Like, if you think about those two things, like, was it pretty much what you expected, or was it, different? And if so, in what way? Like, can you just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think, uh, in terms of what I was expecting going into it, I guess I really wasn't expecting anything. I didn't know what to expect. That's the simple way to put it. But I was just expecting, I don't know, maybe I would do a couple calls with you every now and then, like you'd verbally tell me what's going on, and I quickly realized that you have this pretty impressive, video module series. And I think at least, 60-70% of what I truly gained from this, from using Wall Street Mastermind, I think it came from these video modules because, it was absolutely phenomenal, the kind of things that you were talking about there. And like, I had no idea that you should be prepared for these kind of things and in these kind of situations, and like what kind of attitude to go into. Like for example, I I got really stressed out before info sessions because I thought, info sessions were where the game, is played. I thought that was the place to like really make your mark, and like,
Mm,
these people would be like, oh, this guy at the info session was like pretty impressive, and they would give me a job offer or whatever. That was like sort of the mental conception that I had. And then,
yeah.
I watched one of your videos and you're like, oh, when you go into info session, you just kind of have to like, like your purpose is not to impress. And I was like, oh, like I had no idea. So that's that's sort of like a quick example of how I was, and this is not the only one, obviously. There were many times where I was like, I really didn't know that. And so that really surprised me in a good way, and really helped me a lot, I guess, just gave me the right kind of guidance.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
really interesting example that you picked, because now people are probably curious, like, what do you mean your purpose is not to impress at the info sessions?
yeah, I know, right?
and, and we'll leave a cliffhanger there, and we'll tell everyone, if you want to find out what that's about, you're gonna have to come into the program. But no, I think
Right.
the reason why that's an interesting point, though, is that we hear this argument a lot about how, oh, uh, everything this guy's probably teaching you in Wall Street Mastermind is already stuff that you probably already know, or stuff that you can probably already find online, just by doing a quick Google search. In reality, I mean, like, what what is your opinion about that statement? I guess, having seen what's in the program and what you've been able to learn from it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a false way of thinking about it. Again, like many times that I was surprised, and these things are, I think it gets a lot more subtler when you think about not just the kind of exact prescriptions of what the best thing to do is in a given situation, but going further than that, there's kind of a mentality that comes with, you know, what kind of people are, what kind of people that banking likes, simply put, like, what kind of candidates do these people like to see? And I think you sort of indirectly learn that, these people love people who have a can-do attitude, these people are hard workers. And like in the process, you get to learn that, you also have to you kind of have to be that kind of person who has this kind of attitude to be successful. And yeah, I think that's definitely something that, you can never learn that online. Like, no one on Wall Street always is going to tell you all this in a single post.
Right. Right. And also, I mean, look, I think some of the stuff, even when people tell you, like, yeah, everybody knows that investment bankers like, candidates who are hardworking, for example. I'll just pick an easy example. Like, yeah, they want people with good work ethic, right? It's like, yeah, of course. But then like everyone is trying to present themselves in a way that demonstrates that they're hardworking, right? Or more hardworking than the next person, right? And so the key is not to just know what it is that they want to hear, although that is a big part of it. And a lot of people don't even do that. But the harder part is once you know, even if you know what the bankers are looking for, like how do you know if the way that you're presenting yourself or the way you're trying to
Right.
demonstrate that quality is better than how your competition is doing it because they're trying to do
Right.
the exact same things, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And when it comes to like the behavioral interview, I feel like 99% of the time people are just so focused on it's kind of like what you said earlier, like when you were preparing for interviews, you had constructed your own set of answers and you thought they were fine, but if you don't have anyone to tell you like what else could be better about it, or if you don't have anyone to tell you, hey, like here's how your answers stack up against other people's answers, then most people don't even think about where they are in relation to other people. They're just so focused on what they're doing on their own, and like 9 out of 10 times that's not going to be good enough because
Yeah.
that's just
Definitely.
like statistically speaking, that's just how hard it is to get into banking, right?
Right.
Can it
And
work sometimes, but
yeah.
probably not, right?
Exactly.
What were you
Just to
going to say
quickly
though? I
add
didn't
to
want to
that.
cut you off.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, I think the difference really is in the details. And, of course, investment bankers are notorious for their attention to detail. And I think it's no different in the recruiting process. Like if you really need, like in terms of delivering this kind of just delivering who you are to these kind of people, the all the difference is made in the small details. And I think that's really the kind of things that, I really gained out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you said at least 60 to 70% what you gained was just from like all of our video trainings and stuff like that. So people are probably thinking like, okay, so this is just like another video course, right? Which obviously there are a lot of those out there, right? Whether it's Wall Street Oasis or Breaking the Wall Street or you name it, I'm sure there are a bunch of others. Udemy, YouTube, even like what else do we do in this program, or like is this just a video course or what's the difference?
Yeah, sure. So, definitely don't want to downplay the importance of the non-video aspect of it, which is why I said like, 60 to 70%. But basically everything else I think came from the fact that, you are constantly online, basically, very accessible for questions. And uh, I just think it's you being accessible to me to answer questions directly. You, someone who's obviously been in investment banking, have gone through the recruiting process yourself, and also have been on the other side, and I think that's also extremely important. So that alone is like a tremendous thing. But on top of that, you also have this kind of almost a community of people who are also taking, are also enrolled in a Wall Street Mastermind, and they're all discussing different kind of situations, and what's going on. So this kind of constant feedback loop where you can post a question or you can, see all these updates about the recruiting process and get advice or just know what's going on a timely manner. I think that's definitely a game changer as well. So
Yeah.
that and also I'll add the mock interview. I did one mock interview with uh you guys, and that was also tremendously helpful as well, and I can go more into that as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, we can talk about that in a second, but I mean, you make some good points. So basically, what people should imagine is just like you said, it's like, hey, if a banker offered, because going back to our point earlier, you want someone who's qualified, but you also want someone who's going to be invested enough to spend the time with you to actually help you to the degree that you need help with. And so if there was a banker out there who, offered to basically be on call 24/7 anytime you need it, you can just bother them and they'll drop everything they're doing and set their work aside and help you out with recruiting, then that's basically what this is, right? Except obviously,
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not in banking anymore, and so it's not like you're a side hustle and I have to drop my my investment banking projects just to help you out. Like I'm full time helping out both you and the other people that are in the program, and that's the beauty of this setup, right? And then the other thing
Yeah.
you mentioned that I think is a great point is the community, which I mean, even back when you joined, I would say the community wasn't nearly as big as it is now. Like I said, since you joined, we probably year over year we've more than doubled in terms of size, and so the network
Really grown.
today
Yeah.
is much stronger than what it was before. And you made a great point about, hey, you can constantly ask questions, and other people in the community not only will chime in, but I think the other part that I personally wish I had when I was recruiting is um, just somewhere where you get to see all the questions that other people are asking, because other people
Right.
sometimes ask questions that you don't even think of, but because they asked it and you are in our Slack channels, or you're in our Facebook group, or you're on our office hours or whatever, uh, they're pointing out things that maybe would have been in your blind spot otherwise and you would have never thought about, but now all of a sudden you're thinking about it, right? um, and so that just makes you a lot more prepared, because you're covering all your bases, even stuff that you wouldn't have thought of previously.
Yeah,
um,
definitely. It makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly how it went down.
yeah. And then the last one you mentioned was like the mock interview. So I mean, mock interviews are pretty self-explanatory, right? Like
Hmm.
you do a mock interview, and a lot of people typically when they do mock interviews, and you probably did this too. Like I'm sure you did mock interviews with your friends, or maybe even with upperclassmen at school. I don't know if you did or not, but a lot of people would do that, right? And
I
so
did. Yeah.
what what's the difference? Like, why not just do mocks with your friends? Like
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about, who you want to be mock interviewing you, who you want to be mentoring you. You obviously want someone who's like super qualified, who would ask you the kind of questions that I would actually be asked in a real interview. The kind of person who would give me the right kind of feedback on in terms of what I should be changing going forward. What I did well, what I did wrong. I did it with Adele, and he was a former TMT investment banker, I think, at Goldman,
yep.
and worked at this really cool company called SumZero. And yeah, it's obviously it's he gave me a lot of good constructive criticism. I was about to do a super day with Bank of America, which I think is why I did it. And yeah, it was a lot of help.
Yeah, yeah. I think the biggest difference is just the anybody can, because a lot of times when people are doing mocks with their friends, like maybe they'll grab an interview guide, and then the friend's job is to just read the question off to them and they try to answer it, and then the friend will like check to see if their answers are similar to what's in the guides, right? Like that's
Yeah,
the way to do a mock interview, but there's just not a whole lot of depth to that, right? Because you could do that on your own. You can cover up the answers in the guides and try to see if you can answer the questions, right?
yeah,
Really,
for sure.
the value in doing mock interviews is in the quality of the feedback that you're actually getting, right? And the quality of the feedback is going to be directly correlated to how much experience does your interviewer have, both going through interviews, but more importantly, interviewing other candidates, right? Because if your interviewer is someone that maybe just went through the process once themselves, their feedback is most likely going to be based on their own set of experiences, like what worked for them, right? They're maybe benchmarking your answers against their own answers, and maybe your answers are, to them sound pretty good, and they'll say a lot of times what our clients will find when they do mocks with their peers is like, yeah, I didn't really get that much feedback. I thought I did pretty well, right? And then they'll come and do a mock with us, and then we're just kind of like tearing their answers up and giving them all this constructive criticism, like, hey, here you could change this, here you could change that, here you said it this way, but this is what I would do differently. And also, like, the difference though is because we have a lot more we have a point of reference, right? In terms of all the other clients that we've interviewed before, and also back when we were in banking, we were in private equity, the candidates we interviewed when we were on the recruiting panel, that's all kind of like institutional knowledge that we have. That, going back to my point
Right.
earlier, it's not just about how good your answers are or how good you think your answers are. We're comparing your answers against all the other answers that we've seen, and we're basing our feedback on that, right? And
Yeah,
so,
that's exactly right. And that's probably the only effective way to really up your game when it comes to getting ready for interviews.
right, yeah, absolutely. And so I think, and all of these things may seem like, on its own, may seem like, hey, it's not a huge deal, but when you stack all these different things that we talked about so far on top of each other, it's like everything adds up, right? And in banking, when there's so few jobs available relative to the number of applicants, um, the margin for error is razor thin, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, like, we can talk about this in a second, but just in terms of like, you had to go through multiple interviews with multiple firms, to end up with the offer that you ultimately ended up with. But before that, I'm sure there were multiple, like, close calls where you were like, man, if I were just a little bit better, that would have gone from no offer to an offer probably, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly.
And that makes all the difference at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, and so I guess that's a good segue into kind of like the recruiting process, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think that, like, oh, so everything's easy peasy, and as long as you join Wall Street Mastermind, then you're gonna get every single offer you interview for. Obviously, it doesn't work that way, right? And so
Of course not. Yeah.
I mean, some of our clients, for some of our clients, yeah, it is kind of like that. But for a lot of our clients too, there's going to be rejections along the way before they get their offer. And so, can you kind of talk about that entire process? Because, like, I mean, how many months was the entire recruiting process for you in the end? And, like, how many applications and interviews, and, like, how tough was it until you actually got your ultimately the offer that you got?
Yeah, that's a great question. And not to scare whoever is potentially listening to this, but I
Let's
I guess my
truth.
yeah, no, I'll just say it as it is. And the truth is, like, I guess I think I was on the more, lengthier side in terms of how long I've recruited, and, like, what kind of uh how many firms I had to apply to, things like that. I was definitely on the longer end, and the timing that I got the offer is like at the very end, almost at the cycle,
Mm,
around October. So yeah, just to give you, it's actually interesting. Last night I was sort of combing through my emails to organize my contacts so that I can, like, wish some of the people that I network with, like, a happy new year, and, like, just touch base with them. And I was counting how many people I actually called or met with, and it amounted to like 150 bankers.
yeah,
So I guess it's not like, it's I've seen people who talk a lot more, but it's
yeah,
like a good sort of number metric of, like, what one person did, what I did. But anyways, yeah, I started around sophomore winter, so it's about a year from now. We're speaking in January 2021. So
yeah,
I started around, early January, late December 2019, 2020. Uh, Started calling people, started emailing people for calls, did this whole thing where you go on LinkedIn and uh, try to find who to talk to, and then, reaching out to them, all this process, all these things, by the way, learned from Wall Street Mastermind in terms of, like, how to go about it.
right.
So I did it, and first interviews started rolling in around March. And when I say rolling in, it makes me sound like, there were a lot of interviews. There weren't a ton, but
Right.
uh, I did one with a okay. Am I like allowed to say firm names, or is
Yeah,
that like
yeah,
uh
if you want.
should be fine? Yeah, so I did one with Lazard, and then later during the summer, I had some first rounds with Goldman, and then I went all the way up to a Super Day with Bank of America, and it didn't really turn out that well, unfortunately, for all these processes. And then around I think around early late September, I actually got a call from Morgan Stanley in Hong Kong,
Mm.
and they were willing to let me do a Super Day. I was pretty happy about it. Did the Super Day, and I was very lucky. I actually ended up getting the offer. And around that time, I started interviewing for Evercore. So the strategic M&A group, which is like their main investment banking group, they wrapped up their press process around March, April.
Yeah.
But I was very specifically interested in, this is like a subgroup within the investment banking group there, but it's a group that does shareholder activism defense.
Mhm.
And like I can talk more about that later, but it's basically, if companies come under attack by these activists, they advise these companies in terms of how to defend themselves against these funds.
Yep.
So it was something that that I've been interested in for a long time, and wanted to work there. It sounded like a really cool place to be. And yeah, they extended me. They were one of those direct hire groups, so they were directly hiring. That group was directly hiring on top of the strategic M&A recruiting process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I super dayed with them around October, and they extended an offer to me. So yeah, that's kind of how it turned out.
So it was sounds like starting in December of 2019 up until October of 2020. So it's about like a 10-month long process.
Right.
You went through multiple interviews with a lot of the top banks. You talked about Lazard and Goldman and B of A, and uh, you even got an offer in Hong Kong from Morgan Stanley. But it's not like most candidates out there, no matter how prepared you are, it's just so competitive. Like you're still going to get rejections, right? Like we've had clients that have gotten zero rejections, which is very, very rare. They're like the exceptions rather than the norm, right? And so I don't want people to get the wrong idea that think like, oh, like Sam's just totally full of it and making it sound like everything's easy as long as you join Wall Street Mastermind. Like, no, I always tell people, even if you join Wall Street Mastermind, it's not going to be easy. We're just making things simpler for you. We're removing all the trial and error, but you're still going to have to work your butt off. Like, I mean, do you feel like any part of this was easy, or do you still feel like you have to work extremely hard? It's just that without this, maybe you would have worked just as hard without having gotten the results.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was one of the, I come from a pretty comfortable background, I guess. Like my parents weren't like super poor or anything, but I think it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I think I
yeah,
think
yeah,
I think that's the case for most people when they go through banking and recruiting, right? I mean, I agree. Like, there's going to be exceptions for people that have very, very tough upbringings, but assuming you had a relatively normal upbringing, banking and recruiting is probably one of the most competitive processes that you're going to go through, in the first 20,
exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So ultimately, sounds like you got an offer from Morgan Stanley in Hong Kong, and then you got this offer from Evercore and Shareholders Activism. And by the way, that's a very interesting group. That's like for those people who don't really know what activist investors are, it's kind of like the Carl Icahns and who are some other ones? There are a lot of famous ones.
Dan Loeb, Bill
Yep.
Ackman.
Yep, Phil Ackman with Herbalife, right? Dan Loeb.
Mhm.
So those guys, these hedge fund managers that try to take over a company and get them to do things that they probably wouldn't have done otherwise to try to increase the shareholders' value, right? And so you guys help these companies defend against those really, really well-known investors. So that's a very interesting group. But those are obviously two very, very different options. Morgan Stanley, Hong Kong, Evercore Shareholders Activism in New York, I assume. And so, how did
You know,
you choose between those two, or like what was it an easy decision, or was it a tough decision? Like, what factored into your decision to ultimately take the Evercore offer?
yeah, I think it was I'm glad you brought it up. It was an extremely difficult decision because I had great conversations with the Morgan Stanley people as much as I did with the Evercore people. And, there's a lot of variables here, right? First of all, there's the difference in location. Obviously, New York is probably the better place to, if you just look at location, it's probably the better place to start your career than Hong Kong. It's just a, larger place, it's the center of finance. Uh, but also there's the fact that the offer for Morgan Stanley was a regular sort of investment banking offer. It's definitely therefore it's definitely a lot more generalist, and you get a lot of different exposure to different industries and different products. I think the shareholder activism group it's highly specialized. It is something that I really want to do, but at the same time, you're always kind of worried about pigeonholing yourself in a specific place.
Mm,
You do want to think about where you want to be after if you don't end up loving the place.
right.
So yeah, it was an extremely difficult decision, but I think at the end of the day, it was really two things. First, I really did want to work in New York. I think um, coming from Asia, I guess, starting my career in New York and really getting that exposure to a larger, world and a more sophisticated capital markets. I think it's something that I really just want to experience.
Mhm.
And also, the people that I spoke with Evercore were just they're really dedicated to me. I could already tell that they really wanted me to succeed. And some of these people that I network with, they gave me the kind of support that I couldn't get anywhere else. I think that was something that really I felt very touched, and I think ultimately that those two things were the reasons why I signed with them.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. There's, as you were saying that, there were two thoughts that just came to my mind that I really want to kind of hear your thoughts on. So one is, because we get this question a lot, right? They say, have you guys helped people that have recruited for investment banking in Asia before? Primarily Hong Kong, obviously, right? And obviously most of our clients are here in the US because that's where our company's based, and that's just like the biggest market for us, and that's what we've been focused on. But what what is the difference for someone like you who's gone through both recruiting in the US and in Hong Kong? What is the difference between the processes on the two sides, from your perspective?
Yeah. So first of all, you know, the first big difference is the difference in timing. So US recruiting process kicks off much earlier. So for me, it was almost like, the process in the US was starting to, it didn't seem like it was going very well. And I thought, okay, I should try out Hong Kong. And during the interviews, I was surprised that there were some pretty harsh technical questions. And then there were also pretty harsh stress tests, the kind of ones that you really wouldn't see in an American, sort of a US investment banking process. Like for example, this guy grilled me on why I wanted to do investment banking for a full 30 minutes, and and I gave him the standard answer, and he was like, "Well, I don't buy it," and I just had to, and I was sweating, and it was terrible, but yeah, eventually he gave me the offer. So
Okay, interesting. So, from a process standpoint, it sounds like once you get the interview, it's still just a first round of super day, right? Or do they call it assessment centers there? I'm not sure, but it's first round of super
I think
day.
they called it a super day.
Yeah, so first round of super day, and format wise, it's still the same thing. It's still just 30-minute interviews, right? Except for super day, you're doing multiple 30-minute interviews back to back to back to back, right?
Right,
And
that's correct.
you still need to do you're still going to have a mix of behavioral interviews and technical interviews just like you would in the States, right? uh,
Yeah,
in case people are wondering, the technical concepts that you need to be familiar with are still the same ones. It's still accounting, it's still valuation, it's still M&A, it's still LBOs, right? There's no like new topics that are only relevant for Asia that are not relevant here in the States, right?
right. Yeah.
None of that really changes, but it sounds like you're saying culturally though, maybe the bankers there are uh, a bit more of a, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, hard
Maybe
ass.
a bit more old school.
Yeah, more
Yeah,
cool. Like they haze you a little bit, and they really try to like see if they can phase you during the process and see if you kind of break down a little bit. If you do, obviously you get eliminated, right?
right. Yeah,
Got it.
I think that was really important. But other than that, really, yeah, I didn't feel a big difference. So these guys are people who've been educated in the U.S. Like my first round interviewer went to, I think he went to Penn or something, and like, yeah. So these are all people who studied in the U.S. They speak English super well. They're just, either Chinese or Korean or some other, mostly, they mostly come from Asia. So that's, I guess, the only difference.
Yeah. And so, like on the technical side of things, um, did you feel like the training that you had equipped you to answer even some of the tougher questions that they had? Like even like you mentioned the stress test questions. Like, do you have an example of like what that was? Like, what kind of stress test did they give you on the technical side?
Sure. I think so I remember these because it was very surprising to me. So I'll just put it out there, and maybe the listeners, you guys can, uh, try to figure it out on your own, or maybe ask it to someone else to figure out the answers. But one question that really stumped me was, can you replace if so? There's unlevered free cash flow, right? And then there's net income.
Mm,
But the big difference there is that, net income is after deducting interest, right?
mhm.
So if we adjust net income for interest, we like add back interest, then can you just use that in a DCF instead of the free cash flow metric? And and then he kind of went into the weeds with that, and he was like, well, what happens if you like pull it out 10 years, 20 years, would there still be a big difference? Short end the answer to that is no. But yeah, it was a pretty interesting thought exercise. And also he asked me a bunch of math questions. He was like, what's 88 times 48?
Okay,
Took me a
so
minute to
kind
get
of
there.
almost more like brain teaser type questions.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it. I mean, so that brings up an interesting point, right? Because, and look, by the way, the reason why I'm asking you all these questions about the differences between the two processes is that what I always tell people when they ask us, like, well, can you help me if I'm recruiting in Asia, is that, I mean, yes, we can still help you because I don't really think that the knowledge that you need or the things that you need to do to prepare is really that any different whether you're recruiting for the U.S. or the Hong or for Hong Kong, right? Like, if anything, it sounds like with the Hong Kong interviews, if all you're doing is picking up an interview guide and memorizing the answers to 400 questions and then like hoping that you'll be able to just regurgitate that in the interview, it's probably not going to work, right? Because
Yeah,
these guys are going deep and they're asking you like second level, third level, fourth level questions, and it's follow up on follow up on follow up on follow up. They're not just asking you the surface level questions. That's like the first degree, right? And so if all you did was memorize like, oh, this is how $10 of depreciation flows to the three statements, like
right.
it probably not. You're not going to get very far, right? Uh,
Exactly. Yeah. And these guys, like that question alone, I never saw it in an interview guide ever. And yeah, so just kind of shows you what kind of questions these guys are asking. You really
right.
need to understand it conceptually.
Yeah, it's what I call application knowledge, which is kind of the way we try to teach in Wall Street Mastermind. Is like, I mean, you can attest to this. We don't make you guys memorize any guides or memorize any questions. Like, we try to teach you everything conceptually so that you can think about it and be able to apply it on your own to different situations, which in this case is basically exactly what you had to do, right? Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so that's great insight. And so I think
Also, Sam, just real quick, I think one thing that I forgot to add, just re Hong Kong and that process. One thing that is kind of a requirement for some demographics is, a language capability. So Hong Kong covers Korea, and I obviously speak Korean, and they actually tested for that too. So
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's a requirement for everybody, but it is something to note if you are interested in Hong Kong. So yeah, I'll just put it out there.
I was going to ask you about that too, because what I've heard is that nowadays it's very tough to recruit for Hong Kong unless you speak Mandarin. But I guess outside of China, they also cover Korea. Japan has their own office, I think, but do they just cover China and Korea and that's it, or are there other markets out of the office as well? Do you know?
Uh, from what I know, Hong Kong covers mainly China, but also Korea and also Southeast Asia. So like Indonesia, Vietnam, they pretty rapidly growing capital markets. Obviously, big need for capital there too. So that business is definitely not insignificant. But for the most part, if you're interested in Hong Kong, then you're most likely going to be a Mandarin speaker.
Right, right. Unless, like, for you, obviously, if you went there, you're going to be on the Korean coverage team, I assume. Like, and so there.
Yeah, yeah.
And are you? Oh, obviously, you came in middle school, so your Korean is like pretty fluent, basically. So it's not an issue.
Yeah, yeah. And when I was doing the first round interview, right, it was a Morgan Stanley did a video interview for first round, and they one of the questions they were like, this is our question, but you have to answer it in an Asian language. So like I had to do that. So
Got
that's
it.
kind of how they test you for it.
Got it. No, that's great. That's great. That's good to know. So, but it sounds like, look, for those of you that are considering Asia, I agree. The biggest difference is not so much like what you need to know; it's more around the timing of the processes. Like U.S. goes first. U.S. is the earliest, so a lot of people, like, what they'll do is the U.S. is their first choice anyway, so they'll recruit for the U.S. and then they can fall back on Asia if the U.S. doesn't work out. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is just know that there are going to be some cultural differences where even though the concepts that they're testing you on is the same, they're going to haze you a little bit more in some of these processes just to kind of like stress test you. So you got to be able to withstand the pressure, right? And then
Yeah, 100%.
last thing is knowing the language. Basically, if you don't know the language nowadays, like, you're probably not going to have a shot at recruiting for an office like Hong Kong. So that's all super insightful stuff. The last thing I wanted to touch on with you, because I know I don't want to keep you for too long. You've already been super generous with your time, but recruiting as an international student, can we just talk about that for a second real quick? Because coming back to the fact that, yeah, sure, most people, they want to work in the US, but also it's tougher to work in the US as an international student because you need sponsorship, right? And so
Right.
any advice for like other international students who are, navigating through the recruiting process? Because, the most common question we get from international students is probably like, how do I know which bank actually sponsors or not, right? Or like, obviously for you guys, you have a smaller subset of banks to choose from because the banks that won't sponsor, there's nothing you can really do there, right? So, but I think also the banks that sponsor changes from year to year, right? Like, for example, JP
Right.
Morgan didn't sponsor this year, I believe, but then like last year for the class above you, they did sponsor. And so, like, how did you navigate through that process? And how much harder did it make things for you, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously it was super difficult, I guess, for people who are listening later on, just for some context. The backdrop for my recruiting cycle was that, Donald Trump was president and he was really pushing for sort of, anti work visa policies. And like there was this whole thing going on against him and like the courts. The courts were trying to like, uphold this and he was trying to get rid of it. So I think, this is kind of speculation on my end, but I think the employers were really scared about hiring international students because of this, this sudden risk. Now it's no longer, hopefully no longer an issue because Biden is president. But the backdrop was that plus the whole COVID situation kind of adding on top of the economic troubles in the US, I think that was a really big reason why when I looked around, when I looked around my friends who were also, F1 visa international students, they weren't successful in recruiting. And it, and I knew that these guys were people who, they knew their stuff. These were smart people. They probably and maybe they were lacking in some way, but it wasn't fair to compare them directly with, other US citizen candidates. So
Yeah.
I guess it's just very unfortunate that it's something that we have to go through. I would really have mainly two advice. And the first one is that at the end of the day, it's unfortunate, but you can't really do anything about it. So you really have to rely on everything you can and just try to be the best candidate that you are, because that's the only way that you're going to get hired,
Mm.
right? And obviously, resources like Wall Street Mastermind, it was pretty phenomenal, as I mentioned many times. But you really have to try to up your game as best you can,
Mhm.
and you just have to work harder than others. So like it's tough, but that's just how the world is, and you just have to because otherwise these employers, they're not going to be hiring you. If you as a candidate, you're posing a risk to these employers. You can, because of no other reason than the U.S. law, you can suddenly not be employable. So
Right.
that's the risk that they're willing to take, and you just have to be a better candidate for that.
Yeah.
And second advice from coming from me at least, would be to explore other options, because like even if you are a phenomenal candidate, a lot of this process is unfortunately driven by luck. And if you are unlucky, then you really don't want to. I think for me personally, having an offer from Hong Kong was uh I felt very fortunate, and it did give me a lot of confidence, because Hong Kong is still a pretty phenomenal place to work in finance. And it's still a great place to start your career, and I was pretty happy about it. Morgan Stanley is a great place. So yeah, I think, but I knew this other guy who was also Korean, who was in the same situation as I was. He refused to look at Asian companies.
Mm.
He refused to look at positions in Asia, and because he was pretty adamant on working in the U.S. And I personally thought that he could have had a more open mind. And I urge people, international students, that hey, if you don't get a job in New York or in the U.S., and if you end up going to Hong Kong, or even back to Korea, I don't think it's the end of the world. So
Yeah.
those would be, two of my advice.
That's great advice, man. It's it's very wise advice, I would say. And
Thanks.
I feel like not all college students. I feel like, look, college students a lot of times can get so caught up in, um, I don't know, just like like absolutes, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Uh,
Right.
we've been conditioned to think like, there's just a lot of people online, like, especially in forums or Wall Street Oasis or Reddit or wherever you get your information from, where they would have you think that, oh, if you don't go to an Ivy League school, or if you don't have a 4.0 GPA, then you can forget about banking. Or like, if you don't work in New York, or if you don't work at Goldman or MS or JP, then you're not, like, it's basically worthless, right? Like, oh,
Exactly.
God
Yeah.
forbid you end up at a bank like Deutsche Bank, or whatever bank is being picked on at the moment. But in reality, those are honestly great places to work at, and a lot of people would give up a lot to be in a position to be able to work at those places, right?
Yeah,
And
I mean, you worked at Deutsche Bank too, right? And you can probably say a lot about this, but I talked to some phenomenal people from Deutsche Bank.
yeah,
So it's a shame that it's getting made fun of.
well, and that's not why I picked Deutsche Bank. And look, I get it, like Deutsche Bank's not doing as well now as it was back in '08, even when I went there. But even when I worked at Deutsche Bank in '08, it's not like it wasn't on like Goldman or MS or these other banks level. I'm not denying that some firms are better than others. I'm not denying that maybe you have a preference for one geography over the other. But I think all I'm saying and all you're saying is that we need to keep things in perspective, right? Like, when you really
Exactly.
zoom
Yeah.
out and look at the big picture, if you are one of the few people who ended up in investment banking, working at one of these top 10, top 20, even top 30, top 50 banks, like, even like the other thing that people crap on is like, oh, well, if you work at a middle market bank, then you're a loser or whatever, right? It's like,
Yeah.
no, I mean, these middle market banks, like any of these banks that are in the top 50, the acceptance rate is still maybe like I don't know, 3%, like Jeffrey
Exactly.
last
Yeah.
year, I think hired 3% of their applicant pool. Is like, it's hard. It's hard to get those jobs, and you're still going to be starting out with a salary that's 2.5 to 3 times higher than the average college grad, and there's nothing,
Definitely.
bad about that, right? And so
Yeah.
I think you gave some great advice there, which is just don't be so narrow-minded. It's like at the end of the day, control what's in your control. Like we don't control immigration policy, right? But we do control what we can do to give ourselves the best chance possible. And then also like just being more open-minded and casting a wider net. And of course, at the end of the day, you might still get what you want. Like you still ended up getting into investment banking at Evercore, one of the best elite boutiques in New York City. But like you said, a lot of that is your hard work, and then part of that is luck. And we're glad it worked out, but you just can't bank on. There's no guarantee that something like that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, definitely. And
Uh,
it's very tough that I think it's very difficult to deal with uncertainties. And you if you talk with like one quick story, I guess. I talked with there's this one firm I spoke with like over, you know, 10, 12 people there. And I thought, hey, like I'm obviously gonna get a first round interview here. And I didn't. So it's just um and those conversations were great too. So like you can't really rely on anything during this process, and you just have to accept that part of it it's really just a numbers game, and a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is just like happenstance. Like this guy that you talk to who's an MD happens to like you because he had a great day, and that's why he's pushing it. Like there's just so many different variables where you just have to control what you can. I think that's a great point that you brought up.
yeah, and I think not without like we don't at the same time. I don't want to give people the idea like, well, if there's so much luck involved, then there's no point. Like I'll just see
Oh
something.
yeah, no. I don't want to give off that
It's like the
impression.
margin. Our point is the margin for error is so small. Like sometimes you can do everything right, and it still might not work out. You could talk to 10 or 12 people. You could feel like you had all these great conversations. You still might not get an interview, right? Or you go through the entire interview process and you feel like you crushed it. You answered all the behaviors, you nailed all the technicals. But there was just someone else better than you, right? We've even had other international student clients. This is kind of absurd. It should never happen. But we've had other international student clients go through the entire process. They get the offer verbally, and then
Hmm.
HR comes back and says, oh, sorry, we didn't realize you need a sponsorship, so actually we can't give you the offer. Like,
Oh yeah, that's actually a great segue to talk a little bit about sponsorship.
yeah.
So you asked this earlier, and I realized I didn't answer it. So basically, I think the best thing you could do is just stay on top of which firms sponsor, which firms don't. They change every year. And, I think for me, Wall Street Mastermind was again a really good platform for me to get constant updates on which firms sponsor and which firms don't. And like you can call all these HR, people yourself to figure it out, but they're not going to be always, respondent, right? They're not always going to be like this random college kid asking you if their firm sponsors or not. They're not going to answer all the time. So you generally get a quick sense of what kind of firms are sponsoring that year. And you really don't want to, as you said, it happens all the time. And I know another guy who went through that kind of, that happened to him too. He got the offer and then they were like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't sponsor. So you don't, you want to pick and choose early on as an international student. You want to apply, you want to put in much of the effort into these places that you know would sponsor. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's also something that's really important.
Yeah. So just so I'm clear on what you're saying, though, the way you went about figuring out which firm sponsor early on is you reach out to the HR people at these firms directly and just ask them. Is that what you did?
So what I'm saying is that, you can, I certainly did that with a lot of firms, but unfortunately, a lot of these firms wouldn't respond to you or be clear about this. Like,
Yeah.
they will be, pretty late in responding, which eats up a lot of your valuable time. So the value of having a community like Wall Street Mastermind, or even like some of your friends who are internationals, they all are on top of it, and they will like give you information like, hey, like JP Morgan's not sponsoring this year. It's like, oh, that sucks. Like, and so
Got it. Okay. So you're talking about the power of the community. Like being around other people who are going through the same challenges as you, and it's a collective effort, because our clients, obviously, it's a very collaborative, it's not this cutthroat environment where people kind of hoard all the information themselves. In fact, we have a culture where everybody's always helping each other out, and so you're not trying to figure this out on your own, but other people are also sharing intel with you and saying, hey, I spoke to this bank, they said they don't sponsor, I spoke to this bank and they say they do sponsor, and this and that. And that's also going to help you allocate your time better and be more targeted with your efforts, because you can't network with everybody, and you don't want to waste time networking with firms that you have no shot with from the get-go anyway.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And I didn't spend much time with firms that I knew wouldn't sponsor. Some people say like, hey, that's not the best approach, because if you are truly, even if they say they don't sponsor, if you're a truly exceptional candidate, they'll take you. I guess I didn't really want to take that risk, because I knew, as you said earlier, I knew a lot of people who got the offer and then, it got rescinded just for visa issues. So yeah, that's just my personal choice. Other
Right.
people have different opinions on that.
And I think, yeah, to each their own, right? But I think, the way you went about it is smart, right? You're just being more targeted with your approach and where you want to place your bets, because at the end of the day, we all have 24 hours in a day, right? And there's only so many people you can reach out to for networking, on top of doing all your schoolwork and keeping up your grades and doing part-time internships and joining clubs on campus and prepping for interviews. And there's just a lot of stuff that you guys are being asked to do as college
Right.
students who are trying to break into investment banking. And so it's not, you have an unlimited amount of time to talk to an unlimited number of people. And so you always want to maximize the probability of, whatever effort you're investing in and whatever time you're investing in, you want to maximize the probability of that paying off, right?
Exactly, exactly.
You're just making educated bets, or making smart bets on what's most likely to come through. And obviously, in the end, it worked out for you. So can't argue with the results, right? So, cool. I think we covered so much art. Like, I think, honestly, I've done a ton of these interviews at this point. I don't even know how many, I've lost count, but dozens and dozens of these interviews. And I genuinely think this is one of the most value packed interviews that we've done, in terms of just how much useful information is in here, especially for people who maybe are international students, or for people who want to recruit in Asia. So, for those of you that are listening, hopefully you guys found this to be helpful. Look, I think, just to kind of wrap things up a bit, because again, we're going really, really long here. For those of you that maybe are in a similar situation as Brian, you're an international student, which means you're a bit handicapped from a recruiting standpoint, right? Like, it's kind of like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. You can't just be equally good as the U.S. candidates. You actually have to be better than the U.S. candidates for these firms to have a reason to sponsor you. Like Brian said, like, they want you to be exceptional for them to jump through all the hoops with sponsoring your visas and whatnot. And so, for those of you that are in that situation, if you understand the importance of just controlling the things that are within your control, and you're the type of person who just wants to maximize every single comparative advantage you can have, and you want every little edge, and that very small, even the smallest details, the smallest nuances could be the difference maker in the end, then I want to encourage you to kind of just reach out to our team here at Wall Street Mastermind, to see if we can help you, because we may or may not be able to, right? Like, sometimes international students reach out to us too late in the process, and we actually can't help them. Like, if you're an international student and you're reaching out to us towards the end of the junior summer recruiting process, or when most of the big firms have already finished doing their summer internship recruiting, we're not going to be able to help you, because all the firms that sponsor visas are already done hiring, right? But if you're still a freshman, or you're still a sophomore, and there's still time for you to recruit with these bulge bracket firms and elite boutique firms, and you're an international student, then we most likely can help you, right? In fact, it's probably critical for you to reach out to us, because what we're going to do is we're going to help you get to where you need to be from a preparation standpoint a lot quicker than you'd be able to do on your own. And just based on the how little time you guys have nowadays from a recruiting standpoint, like, efficiency is the name of the game, right? So if that's something that you guys are interested in, I want to invite you to book a call with our team. It's a free strategy session where we'll just learn more about what your situation is and what your goals are and what you feel like you need help with. And based on that, we'll give you honest feedback on whether we think we can help and how we can help if that's the case, right? So to do that, just go to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street in our URL is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And like I said, we'll hop on a free strategy session with you just to assess your situation and at a minimum, just give you some advice on what we think you should do, right? But otherwise, hopefully you guys found this interview to be beneficial. I know I did. I even learned some new things that I didn't know before. But Brian, thank you so much for taking so much time out of your day to talk to us. I think this is one of our longer interviews that we've done. But again, hugely valuable and super happy for you. Best of luck at Evercore. And obviously, I'm sure we'll stay in touch and, we stay in touch with all of our clients and just look forward to seeing all the success that you have ahead of you, man.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. It's been a real pleasure, and I love to help anyone who I can. So yeah,
Absolutely. You certainly did that. So, all right, guys. Well, that'll be it for this episode. Thank you guys for tuning in today. And we'll be back with more of these for you in the near future. All right. Talk soon. Bye.